So thanks everyone for joining our session on how to build a conversion rate optimization engine that yields seven-figure results. My name is Kevin Charette. I'm on the marketing team here at Heap. Today I have Matt Gomes, who's the Senior Director at OpLoans. Matt, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin. Great to join you.
To basically start out, it'd be great to get a chance for you to introduce yourself to the audience and then also give anybody who doesn't know what OpLoans does some context before we get into the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Kevin said, Matt Gomes, I've been with OpLoans for a little over 4 years at this point. I initially joined on the marketing team. I've built our direct mail pre-screen program from the ground up, marketing analytics. I've owned forecasting function for the last kind of 4 years for the firm. And for the last probably year and a half to 2 years, I've really been focused on new product development, new P&L development. Prior to joining OpLoans, I was at Avant, which is another FinTech company in Chicago. Spent some time in the Bay Area, kind of bouncing between analytics and finance, and started my career at care.com. To dive into what OpLoans does a little, we are a Chicago-based fintech platform that is hyper-focused on increasing credit access for middle-income, credit-challenged consumers. I think folks who have a sub 600 FICO score, have an emergency expense, could be a car repair, a medical bill on a high deductible plan, something like that. 50% of Americans today don't have $500 in their savings account, and they really don't have very many good options to meet that need. And that's really the role that we play. We like to think of it as kind of a rescue, rehab, graduate mission. We're able to perform in our role, in our loans. The idea being you'll be able to graduate up the FICO spectrum and kind of gain access to traditional forms of financing again.
Awesome. Thanks for that context. So based on your business model, I imagine your website's pretty important to your success. Can you talk through how important your website is to your business, and also just how important websites in general you think are becoming, how important they're becoming in the fintech and banking industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at this point, I would say that our website is the lifeblood of the business for us. 100% of our applications are sourced online. Yes, we use direct mail like most personal lenders, most banks. Everyone gets it in their mailbox. It's an incredibly powerful tool, but all the applications are still taken online. We don't do any over the phone. It's a little different. When the company was actually founded, we had brick and mortar locations. So it was probably a 70% split in favor of physical locations. And we made the pivot to be 100% digital about 5 years ago at this point. You get much faster scale, much lower overhead. There's a whole host of reasons that we did it, but it really is the lifeblood of our business. I think in the broader context, definitely in the fintech environment, overwhelmingly, I think the web is kind of the primary acquisition channel, regardless of where you are in the fintech landscape. More broadly, I think digital is becoming more and more important for traditional financial institutions as well. So not even necessarily the E-Trades of the world or Fidelities, but even your Bank of America's, Chase, so on and so forth. I don't know about everyone else here, especially in a pandemic. I don't particularly want to go stand in line at the bank. I would say I do 80 to 90% of my banking either on my cell phone or a laptop. But I think that shift, it's only going to get stronger. And yeah, that's kind of my take on the industry there.
Now, when you guys made that shift 5 years ago to be digital focused and not have a brick and mortar focus anymore, what were you basically starting with in terms of tracking your website and your users, and how did that evolve as you moved the spectrum more and more digital to be 100% online?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I joined, it was kind of mid 2016. The firm had already made the pivot. They'd made that decision in late 2015. And Jared Kaplan, who's our CEO, kind of led that charge. We wanted to expand our geographical footprint, and the cost to do that again with physical locations is astronomical compared to going the digital route. When I joined, we had a very kind of janky setup with Google Analytics that we had contracted someone else to set up the tags and all the tracking. Pretty quickly we figured out that it was just outdated data, right? We didn't have the ability to update the tags ourselves. So what we thought were applications weren't applications. What we thought were high quality applications weren't high quality applications. It's a bit of a disaster. And immediately we started thinking about, okay, how do we figure out what's happening on the website if that's 100% of our business? We have the application count, we have the credit performance, we have the loan data off of our loan management system, but we really didn't have a good sense for further up the funnel at that point. It's funny. I think the first investment that I asked for after joining was actually Heap. In late 2016, I think, is when we first signed an agreement with you guys. And the rationale was kind of twofold at the time. I had actually been exposed to your technology when I was at Avant, and it struck me as being much more kind of light touch and low overhead requirement on kind of the company making the implementation than really what I had experienced at care.com, where we had a team of engineers internally setting up the tags, building the tags, writing the tracking code, and you'd have to wait for release cycles. Thinking back to 2016, corporate headcount for us was maybe 25 people. We had probably 5 engineers total. We really didn't have the bandwidth to dedicate 1 or 2 people purely to tagging the website and kind of keeping up to speed there. And my team was a team of 1. It was just me, right? And I was splitting my time between analytics and standing up a marketing channel. So what really attracted me to Heap, right, is we dropped in the snippet and immediately start tracking data. And the proof of concept that we went through with you is, we're gonna just get 30 days of data. We're going to do something with that data, and if that can prove the ROI, I'll be able to get the CEO to sign off on it. And sure enough, we were able to do that. Found a bug in the application, and that smooth sailing ever since. But since that point, we've kind of deepened the bench of what we have tracking the website. We do use Heap to track 100% of what happens on the front end, and actually a decent amount of what happens on the server side of our site as well. Beyond your technology, we do have Content Square that got acquired by Content Square got acquired by ClickTail got acquired by Content Square. So we do have that on there as well. It's helpful for less technical users, some heat mapping. I think of it as kind of the why behind what we see in the heap data. And we're able to tie all of that behavioral data into our load management system data through Snowflake. And at this point, we have a 360-degree view of what's happening and what the outcome is of every session.
Awesome. That's that's great. We definitely pride ourselves on the ability to make things a lot easier for the end user, giving you the ability to track everything all at once without any engineering bandwidth outside of just putting the tag on the site. And most people now have Google Tag Manager, so even that people can do on their own. So
right. I sorry to cut you off there. I think that the one other thing that we've done a lot more of, right, and it is the piece that requires some engineering, but you can get pretty creative. It's obviously the ability to push custom events that aren't necessarily happening in the CSS, the HTML. It's not something that the user is doing. We're able to trigger a lot of those kind of custom events to match up with what we're seeing in the loan management system, and that's been a really powerful feature as well for us. So we have added some investment there over the years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And having been there for a very long time, what would you say? Where in terms of obviously starting out in 2016, where have you spent the most time since then iterating on your tech stack and your ability to just be able to have a good view as to what your customers and your potential customers are doing on your website?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we kind of taken a phased approach there. I think, going back to 2016, early 2017, we really had kind of bifurcated the analyses we were doing. So yes, we had heap sitting on the front end, and we could say, our application completion rate is X, right? Great, we know what it is, we know where it's trending, and we've identified a few pain points in the field, so we can test against that and hopefully drive a lift in application completion rate. On the flip side, at that point, we didn't have kind of a universal data warehouse where we could combine all the data. You can push data out of heap, but into certain things, right? So, your Redshift, Snowflakes, things like that. And at the time, we were still a Postgres shop, so that didn't work super well for us. We also didn't have a BI tool that would allow us to tie it together, so we had to get there over time. We did a lot of the down funnel analyses, relying pretty much solely on, again, application data through loan data, right? So great, we drove a 10% lift in app completions, but the qualified rates of people who meet our credit criteria went down a relative, 10%, and ultimately we saw no lift. That's not the complete story, right? We were just looking at two disparate data points and trying to tie them together, and it worked. We were certainly able to deliver a lot of value, but tying it all together is really kind of what took us to the next level. We've done that two different ways over kind of the lifetime of iterating on this. Our BI platform, the primary reporting platform that the whole company uses, is Periscope, which got acquired by Sisense. One of the features that we really liked there was that they would allow you to kind of put things into a Redshift instance, which meant we could export things out of our Postgres warehouse into the Redshift instance, and then take key events from the heap data set and also export them into Redshift. And that gave us a much greater degree of granularity and understanding, did the application test actually cause the drop in qualified rate or not? What we were able to find is, generally speaking, there isn't a one size fits all result in testing things in your application. You're going to have certain traffic sources that will react one way and others that will react a different way. And it's also true of kind of the credit quality that you're getting from different sources. So having the ability to look at that at a really granular level, which is really how we look at all tests now, has been huge.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue actually into my next question, which is how do you report out, all of these different tests that you guys are running, or the conversion funnels that you care most about? How do you show this to leadership, to the executive team, when you're making these changes?
Yeah, the bad answer to showing anything to the executive team is usually ends up in PowerPoint. So we'll either take a screenshot or we'll pretty it up in Excel first. I think we look at it depends on the complexity of the test and what we're actually doing. So start at the highest level, right? We're like most companies these days. We advertise on Facebook, we'll advertise on Google, and we can test bid strategies or different content. It's in the ad itself, even though the kind of web experience once they clicked over would be identical. A lot of those analyses, they're just done directly in heap, right? We don't export the data, we don't carry it all the way through, because it's not necessarily fair to make an assumption around like loan performance because we tweaked creative on Facebook. I think one of the really nice things that we've been able to do is allow non-technical users on the marketing team, some of the non-technical users on the product team, more on the design side, to self-service a lot of the analyses that they need to do in Heap's kind of web interface. Taking it one step further, again, using the example of testing something in the application, we do want to carry that analysis all the way through from, step one of the application to again, how do they perform at kind of the first choke point, which is going to be business rules and initial underwriting. Did they get through bank verification? Are they signing the contract? And following it all the way through to a funded loan. That is certainly possible in Heap. It's easier though if you export some of those key events out of Heap and connect it into our loan management system, and we'll do all that, via SQL, Python, R, whichever language the analyst is most comfortable in our primary BI tool. So having the flexibility there is really nice, and it's been able to give us a lot of leverage that we wouldn't have otherwise had.
Awesome. Yeah, I know a lot of customers, really enjoy using the heap UI, but at the end of the day, the analysts are the most comfortable in their SQL environment, either Looker, Tableau, Periscope, wherever they do their heavy duty analytics. So makes sense.
It's like one of the workflows that we've seen a lot of, right, is the way we structure our marketing team. We've got folks who manage specific partners. We've got folks who manage SEO, like most marketing teams are set up, right? And my team of analysts isn't necessarily in the weeds with a particular partner campaign that's running. So one of the workflows that we see most commonly is that channel manager will come to us with something they put together in Heap, and effectively they say, "Hey, this doesn't quite look right. Like, have we tweaked the credit file? Like, did we break something?" That's one of the things we're always looking for. Did we break something? And at that point, we know where to look, and we'll dive in under the hood. But that's certainly one of the more common workflows that we've encountered.
Awesome. Well, now that we've kind of built the infrastructure, it'd be great to kind of hear some real use case examples of how being able to track all this data has been helpful to your team. And I guess kind of hinting back to the title a little bit, talk through some of one of the biggest lifts your team has probably seen using this data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of led a little bit here, and I've continued harping on our application flow. Again, we're 100% digital, so the lifeblood of the business is the application. That's incredibly true for us. And one of the first things we did in setting up kind of key events was tagging each step or defining each step of the application so that we could make sure that conversion from step 1 to step 2, so on and so forth, was behaving as expected. So we didn't want to see any wild swings one way or the other. What we started to see in 2017 was this slow, gradual decline of folks completing the app. So from step 1 through step 5. At the time, we had a 5-step application process. And in diving a little deeper, that what we were really seeing was flat performance on desktop devices or laptops, right? And on the mobile side, it was actually a pretty substantial hit that we were seeing kind of month over month over month, which makes sense. And the reason it was manifesting itself is because over time, right, there's been a greater and greater shift to just mobile traffic. Back when I was at Care, I remember planning for, how are we going to handle 55% of our traffic being mobile? That was a wild thought at the time. At this point, we're at about 90% mobile traffic at OppLoans. And, what we were seeing then was a shift from kind of the high 60s to mid 70s. And, the classic Occam's razor approach, we thought, okay, well, it's kind of annoying to have to click through step after step after step and scroll to fill out pieces of the application. So what if we take it from 5 steps to 3 steps? In effect, it really is going from 4 to 2, because the final step is the disclosures, disclaimers you have to fill out whenever applying for credit. Thesis being, if we're losing 10 to 20%, depending on how sensitive the information we're asking for in the next step is, each time we make you click forward, sure, we're going to take a bigger hit up front, and we're going to have fewer people completing those 2 steps versus any of the other steps in the 4-step. But we're going to remove those 2 kind of cliff conversion points. And sure enough, we saw about a 10+% lift in app completion just by making that change. We had to rearrange the questions so it would make sense. You didn't want to mix PII and non-PII questions. So, there was a little bit more thought that went into it. But that change alone, delivered well over 7 figures the first year that we rolled it out. And the beauty of CRO testing is it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, right? It's a snowball effect. So over time, that's been incredibly valuable. I think, again, we've continued to see that shift towards mobile. So it's funny, like the other biggest lift that we've ever driven in testing is also related to redesigning the app again, which we actually did quite recently. And it's the opposite of the approach that we took back in 2017. We thought, well, now that 90% of our traffic's mobile, what if we made the application look like an app, right? So we don't have an app on the App Store to apply through. That would be kind of an odd experience. But what if we made it look and feel like an app? So we went completely in the other direction, and now it's, I believe, a 16-step application flow. But it's very kind of graphic heavy. There's one question per page. It's very easy to just pick the answer, right? We've kind of eliminated drop downs. We've got a lot more radio buttons or icons that you would select. And interestingly, that only drove about a 2% lift on app conversion, which still very substantial. That actually at this point would be close to a 7-figure impact to us. But what it really did was improve the accuracy of the information we were getting. So even though we weren't getting a whole heck of a lot more people to complete the application, we were able to decision them and underwrite them much more effectively. So our ability to kind of close the loan and fund it, carry it all the way through to that point of funding, which is ultimately what we're trying to achieve, that improved by about 10%, which was huge for us. The other advantage to having much more accurate information is it actually reduces our need to continue investing on kind of the operations side. We don't need to add to kind of our customer service teams at the same rate that we would have otherwise. So kind of a dual benefit there. Post application. So I think the other thing that we didn't really notice until early, actually, I guess it was really late last year. We started working on it this year. I think one of the things that a lot of at least startups forget. I'm sure more brick and mortar banks, they're very cognizant of this, but it's always cheaper to kind of retain a customer and continue serving them than it is to go acquire new ones. And that's true for us as well. But one of the challenges that we faced, and if you think about our business model, it makes sense. It's very transaction heavy. So you apply, we're able to meet your financial need, and then you're making loan payments. You're not logging in all the time. You're not checking your account status, because we're not a deposit institution. That doesn't really exist. And it's not like a credit card where you've got to keep an eye on it. And so, we have these refinance email campaigns. We'll retarget folks that have fully paid down a loan to remind them that, hey, we're there in the future if you need us. The problem is they haven't logged in, and people still don't routinely log in. So they have no idea what their password is. And so, the performance on the actual emails, encouraging people to come back, refinance, get a lower rate, what have you, the actual email performance was great. Open rates are fantastic. Click-through rates are great. The problem is 4 out of 10 people couldn't log in. And that's a terrible experience, right? We don't want that. And by the way, that's 4 out of 10 people that just couldn't log in within a 72-hour period. So even if they click the link, suddenly they've lost the motivation. They don't want to carry it all the way through anymore. So we've begun testing additional ways to kind of lighten that login process. Things like text code to log in, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with at this point. We've thought about security questions. We certainly get some pushback from our banking partners there. That's certainly not as secure. But we're trying to solve that next. We have driven some improvement. So at this point, it's probably a 35% hit that we're taking at that login stage, which is certainly substantial. But that's going to be a really big focus for us the balance of this year and early next. And every single time we test it, we're following whatever the data is telling us, right? And that's clearly the next pain point that we should tackle.
Curious, just for your second use case example, you mentioned you went from a 3-step process to a 16-step process. How did you track that? I mean, that sounds like a pretty big undertaking.
It was. It was a fascinating one. So we tracked it really in 2 ways. One, we set up a duplicate version of all the key events that we were tracking on the 3-step process with Heap in really just in a completely different flow, right? So it took I don't know, a day or two to think through the right way to structure that and set up the appropriate events so that we had an apples to apples view. We also decided that, there were kind of key fields that we know are pain points. SSN, believe it or not, isn't one of them. I think most people know if you're applying for credit, that's something you're going to have to have. The most painful one is actually bank account and routing number. It's not something that people know off the top of their head, so you've got to go find it. So that used to live on the the second step of our application, and we kind of use that as a proxy, that those fields in the 16 step as reaching the same point in the 2-step, to kind of figure out, are we efficiently getting people through the funnel? Again, didn't see a ton of lift on actual app completion, but that the improvement in information accuracy was an unexpected and very pleasant benefit. The other way that we actually looked at it, which was at a higher level and more so to sanity check what we were seeing in Heap, was just the optimize the data, right? You have the ability to kind of tag pages there. And so, we did that. It was step one and kind of the post application submission page. And directionally that lined up with what we were seeing on the Heap side. So we felt really good about the result.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of a world where if you had GA, you needed to track all of those events. You would be taking a day only to do it.
I mean, it also wouldn't have been my team doing it, right? I think that one of the challenges that a lot of tools face is that you do need to devote engineering resources, and we're able to self-service that, which is great.
Awesome. And I guess for kind of my final question, I'm kind of hoping that you can, having done all of these iterations and these tasks, are there any recommendations that you give to our listeners on how to improve their customers' experience on their websites?
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends. It depends how mature your company is, to be honest. I think if you find yourself in kind of the same shoes that I was at back in 2016, I think the key to improving customer experience, first and foremost, is just making sure that things aren't breaking all the time, which happens a lot, right? You ship something and you think, oh yeah, it looks great, it works great, and then too many people use it and it goes down. Or you have a key service you rely on and there's an outage and you aren't able to catch it and fix it fast enough. That is probably going to be the biggest source of your customers' frustration. So, and going back to that point, when we first started setting up key events, key definitions, that was the primary focus. And we were constantly monitoring conversion from step 1 to step 2. Did it suddenly nosedive? If it did, we probably have something broken. Did, people suddenly stop signing contracts? Could be that we've stopped rendering them appropriately. So each key point in our funnel, that's where we focused our resources on up front. It wasn't so much about improving the experience in the additive sense. It was just about protecting what the core experience should be so that you don't have folks getting frustrated as you go through it. Once you've got that foundation, then I think it's, you make the pivot and you start investing and kind of thinking about how do you get from V1.0 to 2.0 to 2.5 to 3, right? And that's when you can really start testing, iterating, and leveraging the data you have. I think, if you're a more mature company, and I hesitate to say that about OppLoans, we like to think of ourselves as a startup, under 1,000 employees, we're not a giant public company yet. With would love to get there someday, I'm sure. But I think if you are a really established company, the key is to kind of have a complete view of what your customers are experiencing. So I mentioned, we heavily rely on Heap, but we kind of have a fully encompassed data set that gives us everything that you're doing online and how that relates to your loan performance, whether or not you're coming back, what retention looks like. And we have all of that tracked, right? We have the complete view. I think the more data you have, and if you can build that complete view, you can get a bright couple of analysts or a data scientist or two, and they're going to be able point at the next place you should be investing. Which isn't a super specific answer, but I think the key is, and I've seen it before, it's very, very hard to get that kind of cohesive data set at a really large entrenched organization. So it's worth making the investment to get to that point so that you're able to move forward at a much faster pace.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to use the rest of the time to get any of your questions in the audience answered. Brad, I believe if they just use the chat, they can ask any questions in there.
Yep, Kevin. There is a couple of questions already on the Q&A window.
Okay. Let me see if I can find that. Oh, there it is. Perfect. Okay. So Matt, I have a question here. So operationally, what worked well and what could be improved as you iterated on your application funnel?
Worked well and what could be improved? It's a really good question. So I think what worked well is we have yet to run a test where we didn't know what the outcome was. I think like a lot of companies, engineering resources are always at a premium. So a pain point that I've felt at earlier in my career certainly was having to kind of repeat the same tests because we didn't have the tracking set up appropriately. We haven't had that issue, so that's worked very, very well. I think what we could do a really good job of improving on is actually making our application more responsive. And by that, I don't mean the classic responsive design. I really mean tailoring it to where did this customer come from? So if they came from Credit Karma and we were able to take away fields because we already have that customer information, we should do a better job of making sure that it's as seamless as possible. It adds a lot of complexity to kind of that portion of our code base, but I do think that's something that we're going to invest in the next year or so, and that's certainly something we could improve on.
Awesome. The next two questions are specifically around Heap. So the first one's from Stacy. Are you also using Heap to track your marketing efforts, and which influence not only conversion but retention more?
Yeah, so we are, but it depends on the marketing channel as to whether or not it's kind of our primary source of truth. I think anything that's digital to digital, it is a key evaluation point for us. So, Google, SEM, Facebook ads, any other display networks that we're using, and we test them on and off. It's a key kind of data point that we're using to make decisions about those campaigns. We're able to track on UTM parameters down to all 5 levels, out of the box. We don't need to worry about having to write any code to handle it, which is great. And again, we're using that kind of up to the point of app completion. So session to app completion. I mentioned, we have stitched the kind of key data points on the behavioral side from the Heap data set with our loan management system. From app completion through funding, we're relying entirely on what lives in kind of that data set. It gives us, again, is customer quality coming in as we'd expect it to, or is this just a bad source of traffic for us? Again, are they successfully getting through bank verification? Are they signing the contracts? Things like that. We're able to track with absolute certainty in the loan management system. So that's kind of why that's our primary approach. I think it depends on other channels. So using direct mail as the example, by and large, we track the landing page performance with Heap, but by and large, those campaigns are actually looked at on a per code basis. So everyone has their own code. We're able to rely on kind of what shows up in the loan management system. It's a bit of a hybrid approach, but I would say that's right now how we've looked at it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, Heap out of the box tracks all UTM parameters for any session that hits the websites that you're tracking off of. So I'm sure that If you're trying to track, funnels by marketing channel, which maybe is where the question was coming from, that's super easy, either by user or by session.
Yep.
Okay, so the last question I have here is, if you didn't invest in a solution like Heap, what would have happened?
It's a great question. I'm not 100% sure I have an answer for it. I think, again, we're a 100% online business. I don't think you can actually operate without a solution like this. I know there are other ones out there, and you could always try and build it internally. The investment is kind of astronomical to do it internally. You would need to hire at minimum 2 engineers, and that would be their full-time focus. For the cost of 2 engineers in today's market, you can probably come up with something better for them to do than purely tag what other people have built. So I think you absolutely have to have one. And I'll leave it there. I'm not sure what we would have done to kind of close that one out.
Yeah. The options that we've seen, before someone implements Heap is they try to do it in-house, or they get an agency to come in and help them as ad hoc. Both are pretty terrible options in my opinion, but those are available to you as well. I did get another question. So how reliable is the Heap data when analyzing the front-end customer's behavior on your website? Will it miss any customers' actions? Have you ever met any problems?
Yeah, so I think like any tool that is in a tag, you're not going to capture an absolute 100% of data. I have yet to see anything that does. I think the only way you could do that, frankly, is if you built it in-house and it lived like live in your site versus a tag manager and sitting on top. Historically, I would say that so using just applications submitted is kind of what we routinely use to audit to make sure that there's nothing broken. We see a less than 5% gap over any period of time. I think where we have had problems, and this is more of an internal thing, is in standardizing kind of the approach to creating events. I know it's actually gotten a lot better in the last 6 months, like having the ability to kind of control user permissioning so that we don't have the Wild West in certain sections of our event definitions. That is probably the only place we've really run into trouble. And, I think it's more of an internal bandwidth issue and kind of requiring everyone at the firm to follow the same approach. But from an actual data collection standpoint, we have not had issues.
That's great. I'm going to give anybody who has a question the last chance to ask it. Otherwise, we can close this out.
Hey, Matthew, Kevin, I think while we're waiting for audience to shoot out any other question, I do have one. Matthew, during the session at the beginning, you mentioned about how the analytics part is aligned in your marketing team. I've heard from other customers and prospects that we talk. Sometimes the analytics part is a separate team, or it's part of the product function, or it's part of the marketing function. So, what are some of the challenges that you've seen when it's operated under different teams, or operated in a siloed fashion? Or what are your thoughts on how do we integrate or address this issue?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's interesting. We actually have multiple analytics teams at OppLoans. Marketing analytics lives under marketing, and our task and our role, frankly, is to be 100% focused on improving the efficiency of the capital we put out in the marketplace. It's through CRO, it's through optimizing kind of the credit files that we're using with various partners. We work on kind of the DM response models, things like that. We also have a general kind of business intelligence team, and they really support kind of the non-acquisition, non-marketing focus focused functions across the rest of the firm. So that's everything from, kind of summarizing the data so that the credit team can work more effectively with it, supporting compliance, supporting legal, month-end close, things like that for the finance folks. And the reason we took that approach is I think they're slightly different functions. I think one of them is a very kind of proactive and curious function, and the other one really is more of a shared services and support function. They do use Heap. They do not use it nearly to the extent that we do. They're very much focused on kind of loan performance and that half of the data set.
Got it. Yep. And what are some of the trends that you've seen, pre-COVID versus, now? Obviously, you guys are, completely digital first, is what you said. So, are there any huge spike that you're seeing, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard to say that there's any trend in the post-COVID world at this point, or with COVID. I don't even know what the right phrasing is at this point. I think like just about everyone, we saw probably a 75% plus hit to just overall demand and traffic levels in kind of March and April, right? When no one really knew what was going on. Lockdowns were much stricter, things like that, that were happening. We've seen a bounce back in terms of customer demand and I think broader economic activity. And I was reading, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week, that from a job loss perspective, we're still about 50% below where we were in February from kind of labor force participation. I would say our demand has kind of followed that, not in lockstep, but it's a decent proxy,
Got it. And one last question from my side again. Actually, both Kevin or Matthew, you guys can take a stab at it. So I'm a data person. So what we've seen is sometimes people get so obsessed with data. So one of the key factors to optimize for CRO is running rapid experimentation, right? So what are some of the thoughts on when to look at data in depth and when not to stress too much about the data? Any thoughts on that while we are running experiment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a first stab at it. Kevin, you're welcome to add if you want to. I think we periodically review what we consider kind of the minimum requirements to be able to measure a test, and it's changed as the organization has evolved. At this point, the way we step into it, anything we're testing will go on a maximum of 25% of traffic for the first 24 hours it's live in the market. Assuming nothing's broken, we'll expand that to 100% of traffic at a 50-50 split. And it will be run until we have a minimum of 1,000 observations in each variation. There are almost no instances where we haven't done that. I think the only exception I can think of is when we rebranded our homepage. We didn't wait for 1,000 observations. We were purely looking to see, like, do people just hate it and they're leaving the site? And that wasn't happening. So, we went ahead with the rebrands, but beyond that, I think we're pretty rigid in that requirement. I think anything below that, yes, you can have a statistically significant result, right? It's certainly possible, particularly if the lift is astronomical one way or another. But at the same time, it's a really small sample size. If you had left that running for an extra day and gotten a few more observations, there is a decent likelihood that, yes, it would still be a winner, but not to the same degree. And I think it's worth slowing down just enough to get that confidence so you can make better decisions.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, to echo what Matt just said, I think it's really important not to make a quick decision based on early results. At Heap, we're not as rigid as Uploads is in terms of like having an exact number, but I think you're definitely shooting yourself in the foot if you make a decision just off of like one day's worth of data, or whatever the equivalent would be in terms of the quantity. If it's early results, it can definitely change with the masses. So our recommendation would definitely be to just kind of wait it out until things have kind of settled and you're starting to see some of the same trends, with that change that you've made. before making any key changes to how you're operating.
Sounds great. Cool. And I think we do not have any other question from the audience today. So, Kevin, Matthew, any closing thoughts from you guys before we, call it a day?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'd say, it's certainly exciting that, people are continuing to kind of want to get more and more into testing and figuring out what the data is telling them. It's certainly encouraging that folks are interested, and really appreciate you inviting me on.